Hello everyone and welcome back to Insights at DDLynn Designs. This is DDLynn and I am here today to share with you how to make a copper wire cord link for a leather cord. You can use fabric, any type of cord that you want. So before we get started, I'd really appreciate your comments and feedback, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the bell so that you know when my next project is coming out. So let's get started. The first thing I've done here is I've cut myself 20 inches of a 2.5 millimeter leather cord. And the reason why I'm using 20 inches is you're going to need about an inch. Okay, from this point to this point is an inch. So you're going to need about an inch because you're going to be cutting some of this off. Now, I'll be honest with you, when I first tried to do this a couple of years ago, it wasn't the easiest task. I had to do several of them to really get it down. So I'm also going to be using some 6-step bail making pliers and maybe some bent nose, not sure. I'm just bringing them all out. My wonderful flush cutters, and I love these. I've posted links on many of my videos, and they're really inexpensive, like $11. I've had them for 2 years. I have never bitten into the blade, and I've cut 16 gauge with them, which I don't recommend, but I have. They're small handled, but they really are unbelievably sharp, and they get into the smallest of places because their nose is really finely pointed. I'll also be using some chain nose and some petite chain nose. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do, and it's always going to be excess because we need that to work with when we're wrapping our leather cord. I'm going to cut, I think, about, I'm going to say about 2.5 inches. That should be plenty. And then the first thing I'm going to do is decide on the size loop I want. So if you're going to attach a jump ring, I would make a small loop. If you're going to use the loop as you're connecting, and I don't know where it went. I'm looking for it. I might have dropped it on the ground. By the way, I'm doing this outside. It's such a gorgeous day, and I'm hoping the lighting is good. I just thought, why not take advantage of it? Okay, so let me go back to what I was saying. If you're going to connect a jump ring, make a very small loop. If you're going to use this as a connecting clasp, so you're going to have your hook on one side and your clasp on the other, then I would make this a little bit bigger so that you can get your clasp through it, and or you can connect off with a lobster claw. So the first thing I'm going to do is so I've got about 2.5 inches of wire. I am going to come down about over halfway, and I'm going to use the second step on my bail making pliers. And I'm going to bend this back just a little bit, and then I'm going to make my loop. Now, there's a lot of different techniques for this. This is mine. Your loop, you need to accommodate the size of your loop based on the size of your leather or your fabric or whatever kind of cord that you're using. So because this is 2.5, I know it's going to fit I tuck it in the hole. I'll show you here in a minute. And there's a lot of different videos out there on how to do it. This is just how I do it. And anyway, so I'm using the second step, and it's making a relatively small loop. So if you were going to clasp to this, I would probably recommend using at least your third step so that you can get a nice size clasp inside of there. I'm doing this as an example that we're going to run the jump ring off of it. So now I'm going to place my leather, and I'm kind of trying to, if you will, sneaking it in between. And the reason why I cut 20 inches is I want to make a 18-inch necklace. So I'm going to run it through the middle here. And I'm leaving myself enough leather that I can cut off and also have as support. My wire is really straight underneath, and I'm going to try to keep that leather up on the wire. It's not super easy to do that. And then I'm just going to kind of make sure that this is straightened out. Then I'm going to grab my needle nose, and I'm going to support and squeeze down on that loop and the leather. And I'm giving it pretty good snug. Now I'm using a 18 gauge wire here. So I'm using my fingers initially to wrap it around the leather. So I'm just pushing it around. And then I'm going to get my chain nose and I'm going to snug that down. And as I'm snugging it down, I'm kind of rolling it. Then I'm going to swing on this a little bit, kind of giving it a pull and a snuggie. And I'm going to bring that around. And this is what I mean. It's really hard to keep your cord on top of your wire. It's something I like to do. You don't have to. It can absolutely lay alongside of it. Now, I like to make 3 wraps. So I'm going to just turn this up like this. And I'm going to squeeze and roll that into the leather. So I'm squeezing and rolling it. And you could actually, if you were watching closely, see that wire start swinging around. And then I'm going to grab that tip of my wire again, and I'm going to swing it around. And then I'm going to squeeze and push, use my pliers. So I'm anchoring off that wire, and I'm using my pliers. Now you can turn it around. And luckily for me this time, my leather cord is actually laying on top of my wire beautifully. So I normally like to do 2 to 3 complete wraps. So this is 2, and I'm going to come around again, and I'm swinging it around, and then I'm going to turn it over. Now, before I complete my 3rd wrap, for me, I like to come around the back and clip this tail off really close. I don't like it sticking out, so these flesh cutters are great for this kind of thing. And I'm going to get as close as I possibly can, and I'm kind of shimmying my pliers, my flesh cutters down in there. And now you can see that I have just a little nubby, a little tail. And I'm going to get up underneath that because the leather is very forgiving and cut it even closer. And this is what I mean by these. They are just so unbelievably sharp. So now I'm going to get my pliers again. And before I finish anything, I'm going to push my little loop out. And this is why you have this tail and why we tuck it through the loop, so that we can pull it out and cut it very closely, and we'll do that in a minute. So I'm going to get my pliers, and I'm going to swing this last little tail around. You want to leave yourself a wrapping tail. On the safe side, if this is the first time you've ever done it, use some excess wire. So give yourself, 2 inches of wire if you want, just so that you have enough wire to work with. And then I'm just going to start pressing that down and really snugging it in to that leather cord. So there is one, and then often this will happen where it separates a little bit at the neck. So all you want to do is grab the neck and where your rotations of wire loops are and pull them together. Now, it might make this a little wonky. That's okay. We can correct that. And it doesn't have to be a perfect circle. Sometimes I like it to be like not really a teardrop, but more of an oval shape. So now I'm going to get my very sharp flush cutters, and I'm going to get in here, and I am whittling down in here as close as I can. I am really pushing those in there, and I'm going to cut my leather. Now, some artists are like, oh, don't use your flush cutters for leather. I've never had a problem with it. Now what I'm doing here is even trimming more of that off. I want to kind of hide as much as that as possible, but remember to be very careful that you don't cut your wire. So try to move in different directions. Meaning, oops, dropped it. Meaning keep moving your piece around to get in there and cut off that leather as close as you can without cutting your wire. And believe you me, I've done it. The woes of the ancient art of wire. Okay. So now I'm just going to make some corrections. I'm just going to round her out a little bit more. Now here's a really cool technique. And instead of rounding her out, I'll show you what I mean, how I like different shapes sometimes for my loops. I don't always like them perfectly round depending on what I'm doing and what I'm making. So first of all, I'm just kind of flattening her out. And this isn't going to go anywhere. I mean, I am pulling and tugging and snapping this cord, and it's not going to go anywhere. But you notice when we make loops, there's always one side more rounded and another side more bent in. So what I'm going to do, and this is something I just kind of decided I like doing, all I'm going to do is I am going to kink this side out, and I actually need to hold this firmly when I do it. Never done this on camera, so this ought to be interesting. So I'm holding firmly, and I'm kind of turning my plier in and kinking that side out so that they both got that little bend in them. And then I'm just going to pull them together. Oops. And this got bent up a little bit. It happens. Now I'm using a tarnish resistant pear wire. I never make jewelry with this. This is wire I bought 2 years ago and stopped using it once I became proficient at this unbelievable, beautiful art. And the reason why I don't like using it is that if you scratch it or dent it or scrape off the tarnish, there's nothing that you can do about that. You can't buff it down. You can't sand it out. So when I do use it, I use it for fun things like sun catchers or beautiful crystal dangle drops. So here's our first loop. So let's do the other side. Now I'm going to extend my wire use just for beginners so that they can see that if they have enough wire, they'll have more leniency and movement. So I'm going to cut about 3.5 inches this time. And you could easily clasp off on this because that is the second step on my 6-step bail making pliers. So you could very easily create a clasp and clasp off on this. You could add a jump ring, anything that you want. So I've cut off about 1 inch of leather, which is why I cut 20 inches because I want an 18-inch leather necklace cord. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to come over halfway down on my wire. I'm going to gently bend it back. And now I want to show you how to make a bigger loop by and turning it into the clasp itself. So this side I would put my hook on, okay? Because I want a bigger clasp and I like more of a decorative look for my clasps. So I'm going to use the 3rd step. And you can make this as big as you want. So this is what I have, kind of like an L shape. And all I'm going to do is roll this back. Now, I'm going to turn my pliers around and start rolling this over this way. But I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to bend this side out first because I want this particular shape where it's curving in here. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to literally use my pliers, and I'm going to put my tiny step in here, and I'm coming a little bit above where that other curve is. Oops, I think I need to go this, yes, this way. So my tiny step, my first step on my 6-step pliers is on the outside, and I'm going to swing this out. And it's kind of making, do you see that? Like a bent-in loop, because that's the shape that I want for my clasp. And then I would always hammer this before I would complete or after I completed tying it off. But I think it's easier for me if you hammer it first. So I would hammer this and really bow it out, make it into a beautiful clasp bend. Now I'm going to put my 3rd step back in. I'm just going to open this up to make my life easy. And I'm going to squeeze this together. So that's what you should have. And then I'm going to wrap this over so that hopefully I can keep some of that shape a little bit. And now it gives me more of that teardrop, and I really like that look. So I'm just going to put that back in there. And just because I'm super picky, I'm going to squeeze that into my plier. And then I'm going to straighten this wire out. And you want your wire as straight as you can get it, even though we're going to be hiding this. You don't want to have a lot of waves or bends. And if you're new to my channel, and specifically for beginners, I'm very detail-oriented. If you're advanced, I suspect you've already done this, or if you've been weaving for a while or wrapping, I use the widest part of the jaw of my plier, and I go back and forth on all different directions and sides to straighten it out. So now we're going to do what we did before, and I really like that shape a lot better, and that's just by making some tweaks. Now, here's a little trick. When you're using leather cord, if it's right off a cord, it's very springy, as you can see. This is super springy. So I want the direction of my wrap, meaning I want it to be the same side up. So let's say we call this the front and that the back, because that's where we tied off our little leg and we cut it. So I actually take my cord, and it's not always spot on, and I'm just running my fingers through it and hoping that it's laying in the same direction. Then I'm going to run it through here like I did before. And I'm lining my wire on top the best that I possibly can. And I'm going to get my needle nose. And I'm now going to firmly grab down on the leather and the wire. It's kind of slipping off there a little bit. I just want to make sure it's in there. And I'm going to use my fingers because I'm trying to line this cord up on top. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't have to be. Most people wrap it alongside. I'm going to let go for a minute and kind of adjust my leather and see if I can get it to ride up more. And that didn't really do me a whole lot of good. But you got to try. You know what I mean? So now I'm going to swing this around. And then I'm going to get my chain nose. And you can see that there's a big gap right now. So I'm going to squeeze it. And I'm turning my wrist. And you can see my pliers going. And I'm turning my wrist. And you can see that wire moving downwards. And tightening it against the leather and the core wire underneath. And it's also helping lining it up on top of this wire. So I'm going to bring my tail around, Just swinging it around. Then I'm going to turn it over. And this is what I mean for beginners. Having extra wire will make this so much easier for you. And then I'm just going to keep swinging it around. And you can do as many coils as you like. You might like a lot of coils. I did a piece for a guy, and I wrapped 3 cords together, 3 leather cords. And I didn't have any 5mm leather cord, so I asked him if he was open to that, and he loved it. And then I actually wire wrapped my leather. So I'm going to swing around again. Then I'm bringing my chain nose in, and I'm squeezing that down, and that wire just swung right around. And I'm going to continue to do this so that you can see how cool this looks with the more coils you make. So now, before I finish off on the back, I'm going to cut this as close as I can. I'm going to get my flesh cutters, and I'm really rocking these down in there to get as close as I can. And I'm even going to come in more. And that's pretty darn close. And then I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm rocking it over. And I'm just going to squeeze her in. And I think I'm going to turn it around and do that. I need to hold this. And I'm basically hiding that end. Okay. Now, you don't want to poke anybody. You can also have even more wire and create a really cute little swirl if you want, or a little loop. I'm just making sure she's nice and snug in there. So here's what we got. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut that end off. Now, if you're, again, new to my channel, I would normally take a file and file this edge down so it's not sharp against the person's neck. So this is my front, and this is my back. Or this could be your front, by the way. It doesn't matter, whatever side you want. If you want this particular look as your front, then make sure you cut your wire on the back. So it really, it's up to you what kind of look that you want. And then I'm just going to push my cord through. And I'm going to straighten her out a little bit. Pull these down. Then I'm just going to cut as close as I can without cutting my wire. So see, that's pretty darn close. And if you don't have super sharp, tiny nosed flesh cutters, you're going to have a hard time getting in there. So, anyways, let me just make a little correction here. So here's what we've got. So I made this loop bigger. I used the 3rd step. Okay, use this step right here on my bail making pliers. And I used the 2nd step on this one, because this one I'm going to create a hook, and on this I will leave it as the clasp. Now, just for some ideas, you could put a lobster claw on here if you didn't want to make a hook. So I'm going to show you how to make a hook. And I'm going to use about, depending how long you want your hook, you need at least 2.5 inches of wire. I'm just going to use about 3.5 because I'm thinking about beginners. And this is another thing I don't like about pear wire. It kinks really easy because that tarnish resistance on it, it's I don't know. I can't explain it. I'm going to try. It kinks very easy. It bends differently. It's hard to keep its form. I mean, I know a lot of people use it and love it. I don't. I don't. So I'll use it for decorative pieces like I mentioned in sun catchers. So I've got about 3.5 inches of wire here, and I'm going to find my center, which is right here. And depending on your clasp length is why I use this amount of wire, because you can make a really big clasp. And I'm just using the second step. You could actually use the first step, which I think I will because we're going to close it together. And I'm just going to bring my legs together. Then I'm going to get my chain nose and I'm going to start to slowly, and for beginners, your wire is going to want to flip up on you. And that's because it's round. So work on both sides as you slowly start to squeeze in. And this is another thing with this tarnish resistant wire. It's very slippery. I'm going to try my bent nose. I need something with a wider, flatter jaw. Oh, much better. I tell you, tools are everything. So I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to keep squeezing. And that's what I mean. It's going to keep flipping on you. Now, I'll keep this, but I'll make another hook. I'll probably use some sterling, because again, once you ding it, you can't do anything about it. So with raw copper or silver, you can buff and sand and drill out. So what I'm doing is I'm really squeezing that together. So I've squeezed my tip together, and normally I would not allow these kinks, but I just wanted to do this quickly for you, this tutorial. And you have to be really careful with your pliers when you're working with this tarnish resistant wire. Because once you ding it, as I mentioned, that's it. There's no turning back. Now, I'm going to tell you something I have done, and it's actually very cool. I made a really big piece with this, and of course, some of it got dinged, and it irritated me to no end. So I sanded off, which comes off super easy, this silver plate. And I left half of it where I didn't ding it silver, and the other half copper, and it was just really, really cool. So that's something, if you can get away with it, and it's not like in a little spot and the rest is all silver, I would give that a go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my hook, and you can decide on how long you want your hook. I'm going to use the first step, coming down about a little over a 1/4 inch, and I'm just rolling these legs up into the hook, and you do not want to close that hook. Now, there are many ways to make a clasp. So I'll teach, I do them in so many different ways. And I'm just going to square this off because it's a little cocky. There we go. She's a little bit straighter. Okay. So you could make 2 loops on the bottom here and wrap it through here. So you could just put this through here, cut your ends, and loop off right there. Or you could take one of the legs and wrap it around the other leg and then make a loop on the bottom. So it's really up to you. There's so many different ways to make clasp. And maybe one day, if y'all are interested, let me know. I'll do a tutorial on like 5 different clasps. There's just so many wonderful ways to make clasp. So I know I don't need this really big. My hook is substantial enough to go in and stay. And here's a little tip. You want to kind of roll. So what I'm doing here is I'm coming off the tip of where I bent that little nose. And I've got my finger on the back, and I'm kind of rolling that up a little bit. And I could have done this in advance, but I forgot about it. So all I'm doing is I'm rolling that nose up a little bit. You see that? Then I'm going to squeeze this in closer. It's hard to believe this is 18 gauge. It's just such a floppy wire. To me, I know I'm complaining about it a lot, you guys. I just don't like it. You know how it is when we don't like something, we don't like it. There's no convincing, right? Okay, so there we have it, a little hook. So what I'm going to do is I know I need about over 1/4 and a little under 1/2 inch to make my loops. And if you decide on how you want your loops, if you want your loops to come underneath so that when you have this in here, your loops are going underneath. So let's say this is the back. So imagine 2 loops here coming underneath, or you could have your loops rolling up. So I'm going to have my loops, because I kind of like that look, rolling up. So I know that I have about a little less than 1 inch. First, I'm just going to even up my legs, because I hate to cut wire when everything's so uneven. It kind of creates an illusion. And I am going to leave myself just to have enough working wire, about 1/2 inch. And then I just don't like this wire. It just tweaks and bends. It's almost like, I know what it is about this wire. It's springy. I'm just making a tangled, mangled mess out of this, but it's just for the purposes of the tutorial. So now what I'm going to do is get my smallest step. And I think what I'm going to do, let me find my clasp side. So this is my clasp side because this is the biggest one. I think what I'm going to do is just run it through here and go ahead and clasp off so I don't have to open that up again. So I'm going to roll these back. And I'm going to use my second step. So here's a tip for beginners. When you're using round nose or bell making pliers, you want to make sure that when you put your wire ends, your leg ends in between your 2 barrels, or using a round nose, you want to make sure that you can't feel those ends. And all I'm going to do is turn my wrist, and I just realized I did it in the opposite direction that I wanted. Yeah. Sorry, you guys, but hey, you get to learn, right? No, I was doing it right. I've just mangled this wire something fierce. Oh, well, we're learning a tutorial. You get to watch me make all these boo-boos. So I'm just going to turn my loops. And you don't have to put it in your loop off your... I'm just doing it just to not have to open it up again. So now, normally I would have my round nose out here, and I don't. But that's what we have. And I'm just going to curl these in. 1. Turn this around in a working position. And 2. And then I'm just going to line them up. And my hook is now, my little mangled hook is now inside of my clasp. I kind of like that look. I just think it's kind of cool. Everybody's different, but I like sometimes my loops on top. Just gives it kind of a different design element to it. And here we have it. So this will fit beautifully in here. And you want to make sure, again, that you don't close it all the way, but you close down your loop on your hook so that you just have a little bit of gap space. And this is why you hammer this, because you want it super strong and durable, and you really don't want it to move out of its position. If you didn't hammer this 18 gauge wire after you made your hook, I promise you, as the person is wearing it, it will continue to open up. So hammer 3/4 of that hook, meaning imagine it spread out, and just hammer the whole hook, not the entire piece. You can hammer the legs up to where you're going to bend your loops back, okay? But you want it So where they feel it connecting. I don't know if you can hear that, but you want them to have a little bit of resistance. So there we have it. Our leather cord, hoop or loop attachments with a hook clasp. I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. Please give me your feedback and let me know really if you'd like to see a tutorial just on clasp and hooks. I did a hinge, hook, and clasp tutorial, and it's in my YouTube page, and I have saved tutorials to a tutorial page, DDLynn Designs Jewelry, so you should be able to find them in my tutorial folder. And for all of you, I wish all of you all that you wish for yourselves. And remember, as Thumper said in Bambi, please be kind, because if you ain't got nothing nice to say, then don't say nothing at all. Have a magical, fabulous, wonderful Wirewrap day.